The morning sun filtered through the white hospital curtains as Sarah Chin sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling slightly as she signed the final consent forms. The heart surgery scheduled for tomorrow had been weighing on her mind for weeks, but today felt different. Today felt final. "Mrs. Chen, your husband is here to see you," the nurse announced with a warm smile, adjusting Sarah's foreline one more time before stepping aside. David walked in carrying a bouquet of white lilies, her least favorite flowers, though he'd never bothered to remember that detail in their 18 years of marriage. His smile seemed forced, and Sarah noticed how his eyes kept darting to his phone. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" David asked, placing a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. His cologne was different today, something expensive and unfamiliar. "Nervous," Sarah admitted, watching her husband's face carefully. "The doctor said there's always risk with this type of surgery. The mortality rate is still around 15%. Something flickered across David's expression. Was it concern or something else entirely? "Don't think about statistics, Sarah. You're strong. You've always been the fighter in this family." Emma and Lucas burst through the door before Sarah could respond, their teenage energy filling the sterile room with life. Emma, now 16 and looking more like Sarah every day, rushed to embrace her mother with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm so scared," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "What if something happens to you?" Sarah's heart ached as she held her daughter close. Lucas, trying to be brave at 14, stood awkwardly by the window, his jaw clenched in the same way Sarah's did when she was trying not to cry. "Come here, baby," Sarah called to her son, and Lucas finally broke, rushing into his mother's arms. For a moment, the three of them held each other, and Sarah felt the overwhelming weight of how much she had to live for. David cleared his throat. "Kids, your mom needs to rest. Why don't we go grab some lunch and let her sleep?" "Actually," Sarah said softly, "I'd like them to stay a little longer. We haven't had much time together lately with all the pre-surgery appointments." David's phone buzzed, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Jessica. Her stomach tightened. Jessica Martinez worked at David's insurance office, and lately, her name had been appearing on his phone more frequently. "I should take this," David said quickly, stepping into the hallway. Sarah's mother, Margaret, chose that moment to arrive, carrying a thermos of homemade soup and wearing the worried expression she'd perfected over her 68 years. Margaret had never fully approved of David, though she kept her opinions mostly to herself for the sake of family harmony. "How's my strong girl?" Margaret asked in Mandarin, settling into the chair beside Sarah's bed. Her eyes followed David's retreating figure with obvious disapproval. "I'm okay, Mom. Just trying to stay positive." Margaret studied her daughter's face with the intuition only a mother possessed. "Something's troubling you besides the surgery." Sarah glanced at her children, who were now distracted by Lucas's new video game, then back at her mother. "It's probably nothing. David's been distant lately. More phone calls, working late more often." "A wife knows," Margaret said simply, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Trust your instincts, darling." Through the glass window, Sarah could see David pacing in the hallway, his voice animated as he spoke on the phone. Jessica's name appeared on his screen again when he returned, and this time Sarah was certain she saw him smile before declining the call. "Sorry about that," David said, settling back into his chair. "Work emergency." The afternoon passed in a blur of final preparations and family visits. Sarah's business partner, Maria Santos, stopped by with updates from their interior design firm, assuring Sarah that everything would be handled perfectly during her recovery. "The Morrison project is moving ahead on schedule," Maria reported, "and I've already started preliminary work on the Riverside mansion renovation. Don't worry about anything except getting better." Sarah felt grateful for Maria's friendship and competence. Their business had grown from a small startup to one of the city's most sought-after design firms, and Sarah's personal net worth had reached nearly $2 million, a fact that David had mentioned increasingly often lately. As evening approached and visiting hours ended, Sarah found herself alone with David for the first time all day. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken tensions. The kids are staying at your mother's tonight, David said, avoiding eye contact. I'll be back first thing in the morning before your surgery. David, Sarah began carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. His body tensed almost imperceptibly. Of course, Sarah. What is it? Are you having an affair? The question hung in the air between them like a physical presence. David's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally, practiced innocence. Sarah, how can you ask me that? Especially now, the night before your surgery? I'm stressed too, you know. I might lose my wife tomorrow. His voice carried just the right amount of hurt and indignation. But Sarah had built a successful business by reading people, by trusting her instincts about human nature. Every fiber of her being was screaming that her husband was lying. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You're right. I'm just scared and not thinking clearly. David's relief was palpable. He kissed her forehead again, the same distant gesture from earlier. Get some rest, sweetheart. Tomorrow you're going to come through this surgery perfectly, and we'll have our whole life ahead of us. After he left, Sarah lay in the darkness, her heart monitor beeping steadily beside her. Through her window, she could see the city lights twinkling like stars, and she wondered if this might be one of the last times she'd see them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. I love you so much, Mom. You're going to be okay. I just know it. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks as she typed back, I love you too, sweetheart. Take care of your brother and grandmother for me. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah's mind kept returning to David's expression when she'd mentioned the surgery's mortality rate. She'd seen many emotions cross her husband's face over the years, but tonight, for just a moment, she could have sworn she'd seen something that chilled her to the bone. It looked almost like hope. The last thing Sarah remembered before the pre-surgery sedatives took effect was the sound of her heart monitor, beating strong and determined, as if her heart itself was preparing for the fight of her life. Sarah's surgery began at dawn, lasting 7 grueling hours. The cardiac team worked meticulously to repair her damaged mitral valve while her family waited anxiously in the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital. What none of them knew was that during those critical hours, David Chin was having the most important conversation of his life. At 2:47 p.m., while Sarah lay unconscious on the operating table, David sat in his silver BMW in the hospital parking garage, speaking quietly into his phone. The call had been scheduled for this exact moment. Jessica, it's me. The surgery started this morning. We should know something in the next few hours. Jessica Martinez's voice was hushed but urgent on the other end. How are you holding up? I know this must be difficult. David glanced around the empty parking garage before responding. It's necessary, Jess. You know that. Sarah's life insurance policy is worth $3 million, plus there's her business assets, the house, her investment accounts. We've been over this. I still feel terrible about it, Jessica whispered. She seems like such a nice woman. Nice doesn't matter when you're talking about starting a new life together, David replied coldly. Besides, the doctor said there's a real chance she won't make it through this surgery. Heart operations are risky, especially at her age. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in the surgical waiting room, Margaret Wong sat beside her grandchildren, her maternal instincts on high alert. Something about David's behavior during the surgery had been bothering her all day. Grandma, why does Dad keep leaving to make phone calls? Emma asked, her eyes red from crying. Margaret looked toward the hallway where David had disappeared for the 4th time that day. Some people handle stress differently, sweetheart. But Margaret's suspicions went deeper than stress. She'd noticed how David had seemed almost calm during the surgery updates, how he'd asked very specific questions about Sarah's life insurance beneficiaries the week before, and how he'd been pushing Sarah to update her will right before the operation. Lucas, who had inherited his mother's intuitive nature, looked up from his video game. Dad's been acting weird for months. He never used to get so many work calls. What kind of weird? Margaret asked gently. Like, he talks differently when he thinks we're not listening. And he's always texting someone named Jessica. I saw it on his phone when he was helping me with homework. Margaret's blood ran cold. Jessica Martinez. She remembered that name from David's office Christmas party last year, a young, attractive woman who had seemed entirely too comfortable around Sarah's husband. At that moment, David returned from his latest phone call, his face composed but his hands slightly shaky. Any updates from the surgical team? Not yet, Margaret replied, studying his expression carefully. David, who have you been calling? You've been on the phone constantly. Just work stuff, Margaret. I have to keep the office running even during family emergencies. His response came too quickly, too practiced. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Sarah's cardiac surgeon, emerged from the operating room at 4:15 p.m., still wearing her surgical scrubs. The exhaustion on her face made everyone's heart skip a beat. Family of Saracen? They all rushed toward her, but Dr. Reeves raised a hand for calm. The surgery went well, but there were complications. Sarah's heart stopped twice during the procedure. We were able to resuscitate her both times, but the next 24 hours are critical. David's face went through a complex series of emotions, concern, relief, and something else that Margaret couldn't quite identify. Can we see her? Emma asked desperately. She's in the cardiac ICU now. Only immediate family, and only one person at a time for the first few hours. David immediately stepped forward. I'll go first. I'm her husband. But Dr. Reeves held up her hand again. Actually, Mr. Chen, Sarah specifically requested that if she survived the surgery, she wanted to see her mother first. She made this request during her pre-op consultation yesterday. Margaret felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. Even facing death, Sarah had trusted her maternal instincts. I don't understand, David said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. I'm her husband. I should be the first to see her. Those were her wishes, Dr. Reeves replied firmly. Mrs. Wong, if you'll follow me. As Margaret walked toward the ICU, she heard David behind her, already pulling out his phone. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone was agitated, almost angry. Sarah lay in the cardiac ICU surrounded by monitors and machines, her face pale but peaceful. When she saw her mother, tears immediately sprang to her eyes. Mom, she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible above the beeping of the heart monitor. Margaret took her daughter's hand carefully, mindful of all the IVs and tubes. You made it, my brave girl. You're going to be okay. I need to tell you something, Sarah said urgently, despite her weakness. Before the surgery, when they were giving me the anesthesia, I heard something. David was in the hallway on his phone. Margaret leaned closer. What did you hear? He was talking to someone named Jessica. He said. Sarah's voice broke. He said that if I didn't make it through the surgery, they could finally be together. That he'd been waiting for this opportunity. The machines around Sarah began beeping more rapidly as her heart rate increased with the emotional stress of the revelation. Are you certain, darling? The anesthesia can cause confusion sometimes. I'm certain, Mom. And there's more. Last week, David insisted I update my will. He said it was just being responsible before the surgery, but now I understand why he was so interested in making sure everything was properly documented. Margaret felt a rage building inside her that she'd never experienced before. Her son-in-law had been planning for her daughter's death, treating it like a business opportunity. What do you want me to do? Margaret asked quietly. I need you to find out everything you can about this Jessica person. And I need you to be careful. If David realizes that I know, I don't know what he might do. I'll handle it, Margaret promised. But right now, you need to focus on getting better. Your children need you. I need you. When Margaret returned to the waiting room 20 minutes later, she found David pacing anxiously. His phone had been buzzing constantly, and she could see multiple text messages from someone listed as Jay in his contacts. "How is she? Can I see her now?" David asked immediately. "She's very weak," Margaret replied carefully. The nurse said only one more visitor tonight, and she asked for Emma. David's frustration was barely contained. "I'm her husband, Margaret. This is ridiculous. She almost died today, David. Let her see her daughter." As Emma went in to visit her mother, Margaret watched David carefully. He was typing furiously on his phone, his jaw clenched with barely suppressed anger. When he thought no one was looking, she saw him scroll through what appeared to be financial documents on his phone screen. Lucas dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. Margaret pulled out her own phone and, using skills her tech-savvy grandchildren had taught her, began researching Jessica Martinez. What she found made her stomach turn. Jessica Martinez, 32, had recently filed for divorce from her husband of 8 years. According to her social media profiles, which weren't fully private, she'd been posting cryptic messages about new beginnings and waiting for the right moment for the past several months. But the most damning evidence was a photo from 3 weeks ago, David and Jessica at what appeared to be an intimate dinner, his wedding ring notably absent from his finger. Margaret screenshotted everything, her hands shaking with anger and determination. Her daughter had survived today's surgery, but Margaret realized that the real battle was just beginning. At 11 p.m., as visiting hours ended, David finally got his chance to see Sarah. Margaret watched him disappear into the ICU, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he looked more like a man checking on an investment than a husband visiting his beloved wife. Through the ICU window, she could see David standing over Sarah's unconscious form, and for just a moment, his mask slipped completely. The expression on his face was one of pure calculation, as if he were weighing his options and considering his next move. Margaret knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she had work to do. She had a daughter to protect and a son-in-law to expose, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to keep her family safe. The heart monitor in Sarah's room continued its steady rhythm, but Margaret wondered how long that strong heart would keep beating once David realized his plans had been discovered. Sarah's recovery progressed faster than anyone expected, including David. By the 3rd day post-surgery, she was alert, sitting up, and asking probing questions that made her husband increasingly uncomfortable. What David didn't know was that Sarah had been feigning more weakness than she actually felt, using the time to observe and gather information. "The nurses have been so kind," Sarah mentioned casually as David sat beside her bed, scrolling through his phone. "Especially Jessica from the cardiac unit. Such a sweet girl." David's head snapped up, his face momentarily panicked before he composed himself. "Jessica? I don't think I've met her." "Really? She mentioned she knew you from somewhere. Said you two had met at some work function." Sarah watched her husband's reaction carefully, noting how his jaw tightened and his fingers gripped his phone. "Must be mistaken," David replied quickly. "I meet a lot of people through the insurance business." But Sarah had laid a trap, and David had walked right into it. There was no Jessica working in the cardiac unit. Sarah had made up the entire story to test her husband's reaction, and his panic had confirmed her worst suspicions. That afternoon, while David was at home showering and changing clothes, Margaret arrived with disturbing news. She'd spent the previous evening conducting her own investigation into Jessica Martinez. "I found her address," Margaret whispered, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "She lives in the Riverside Apartments, Unit 2B. The same complex where David claimed he was meeting insurance clients last month." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, causing the monitor to beat more rapidly. "There's more, isn't there?" Margaret pulled out her phone, showing Sarah a series of screenshots. Jessica Martinez filed for divorce 6 months ago. According to the court documents, she cited irreconcilable differences and desire to start a new life with someone else. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. "Right before my surgery was scheduled," Sarah realized, the pieces clicking into place. "There's something else," Margaret continued grimly. I called your insurance company yesterday, pretending to be you, asking about your policy details. They told me that David called them 2 weeks ago asking very specific questions about how quickly death benefits are paid out and whether there would be any delays if the cause of death was surgical complications. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling nauseous. The man she'd trusted with her life, the father of her children, had been planning her death like a business transaction. Mom, I need you to do something for me, but you have to promise to be careful. Anything. I want you to follow David tonight. He told me he was going to work late to catch up on some files, but I have a feeling he's meeting Jessica. If we can get proof of their relationship and their planning, we might be able to protect ourselves and the kids. Margaret nodded grimly. I'll take my camera. If they're together, I'll document everything. What neither woman knew was that Lucas had been standing outside the door for the past few minutes, having arrived early for his afternoon visit. At 14, he was old enough to understand the implications of what he'd overheard, and the revelation about his father filled him with a rage he'd never experienced. When Lucas entered the room, his face was pale but determined. Mom, I heard what you and Grandma were talking about. Sarah's heart sank. She'd wanted to protect her children from this nightmare. Honey, Dad's been cheating on you, and he wanted you to die so he could be with his girlfriend, Lucas said bluntly. I'm not a little kid anymore, Mom. I can handle the truth. Margaret looked between her daughter and grandson, recognizing the same steel determination in both their faces. If that's true, Lucas continued, then Emma deserves to know too. We're a family, and families protect each other. That evening, David arrived at the hospital carrying flowers and wearing his most concerned husband expression. But Sarah was ready for him. David, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday about my will and the insurance policies, she began carefully. His attention sharpened immediately. What about them? Well, since I survived the surgery, maybe we should review everything. Make sure all the beneficiaries are still appropriate. Sarah watched his face carefully. I was thinking about making some changes. The color drained from David's face. Changes? What kind of changes? Oh, nothing major. Maybe setting up trust funds for the kids that can't be accessed until they're older. And I was thinking about making my mother a co-beneficiary on some policies, just in case something happened to both of us. David's phone buzzed with a text, and Sarah caught a glimpse of Jessica's name on the screen along with the words, "Can't wait much longer." Actually, Sarah continued, there's something else I wanted to discuss. The nurses mentioned that spouses sometimes have trouble coping with the stress of their partner's illness. Some even develop feelings for other people during difficult times. David's hand tightened on his phone. That's ridiculous. Why would you even think about something like that? I don't know. Maybe because you've been getting a lot of texts from someone named Jessica, and you always seem happier after talking to her. The accusation hung in the air between them. David's face went through a series of calculations before settling on indignant denial. Sarah, you're being paranoid. The medication and the stress of surgery are making you imagine things. But Sarah had learned to read people in her business, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that her husband was lying. You're right, she said finally. I'm probably just being silly. Why don't you go home and get some rest? You look tired. After David left, promising to return first thing in the morning, Sarah called Emma and asked her to come to the hospital. It was time for her family to know the truth. Emma arrived 30 minutes later, her face immediately showing concern when she saw her mother's serious expression and her grandmother's grim demeanor. Sweetheart, sit down. There's something important we need to discuss as a family. Over the next hour, Sarah explained everything, David's affair, his planning for her death, the insurance policies, and the evidence they'd gathered. Emma's reaction was immediate and fierce. I hate him, she said through tears of rage and betrayal. How could he do this to you? To us? I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that we're going to protect each other and get through this together. Meanwhile, Margaret was sitting in her car across from the Riverside Apartments, watching David's BMW parked outside Unit 2B. At 9:47 p.m., she photographed David and Jessica embracing passionately outside the apartment door, completely unaware they were being watched. But as Margaret prepared to leave, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. David and Jessica were standing on the apartment balcony, and their voices carried clearly in the quiet night air. "The surgery didn't work," David was saying angrily. "She's recovering faster than expected. The doctor said she could be home within a week." "What does that mean for us?" Jessica asked nervously. "It means we need to consider other options." Sarah's starting to ask questions about the insurance policies. "If she changes the beneficiaries, we'll lose everything." "David, you're scaring me." "What kind of other options?" Margaret strained to hear David's response, and what she heard made her realize that Sarah's survival of the surgery hadn't ended the danger, it had only escalated it. "Hospital accidents happen all the time," David said quietly. "Medication errors, equipment failures, infections. Sarah's still vulnerable while she's recovering." Margaret's hands shook as she photographed and recorded everything, realizing that her daughter wasn't safe even in the hospital. David's greed and desperation had reached a point where he was willing to commit murder to get what he wanted. As she drove back to the hospital, Margaret knew that the game had changed completely. They weren't just dealing with adultery and financial scheming anymore, they were dealing with a man who was prepared to kill his own wife rather than lose his chance at Sarah's money. The heart monitor in Sarah's room continued its steady rhythm, but Margaret wondered how much longer that rhythm would continue if David realized that his plans had been discovered and his time was running out. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, and Margaret knew that protecting her daughter would require more than just gathering evidence, it would require staying one step ahead of a desperate man who had already proven he valued money more than human life. The next morning brought a development that would change everything. Dr. Reeves arrived for Sarah's daily checkup with news that should have been celebratory. Sarah was recovering so well that she could potentially go home 2 days earlier than expected. "Your heart function is excellent, Mrs. Chin. The surgery was a complete success, and your body is healing beautifully," Dr. Reeves announced with a smile. But instead of joy, Sarah felt a chill of fear. If Margaret had overheard correctly last night, going home early would put her directly in David's path, away from the relative safety of the hospital's constant monitoring and witnesses. "Actually, doctor, I've been experiencing some chest pains," Sarah lied smoothly. "Sharp pains, especially when I breathe deeply. And I've been feeling dizzy when I stand up." Dr. Reeves frowned, immediately concerned. "Let me examine you more thoroughly. We may need to run some additional tests." David, who had arrived just in time to hear about the early discharge, looked frustrated by this development. "Are these new symptoms serious? I mean, if Sarah's ready to come home, maybe the chest pains are just normal healing discomfort." "Mr. Chin, any post-surgical symptoms need to be taken seriously," Dr. Reeves replied firmly. "I'd rather keep Mrs. Chin here a few extra days to monitor her condition than send her home prematurely." After the doctor left, David's mask slipped slightly. "Sarah, are you sure you're experiencing these symptoms? You seemed fine yesterday." "Are you questioning my pain, David?" Sarah asked quietly, studying her husband's face. "It seems like you're awfully eager to get me out of here." Before David could respond, Margaret arrived with Emma and Lucas, carrying homemade soup and wearing an expression that immediately told Sarah that last night's surveillance had yielded important information. "David, could you get us some coffee from the cafeteria?" Margaret asked sweetly. "I know Sarah would appreciate some of that hazelnut blend they have downstairs." David looked like he wanted to refuse, but couldn't find a reasonable excuse. "Of course. I'll be back in a few minutes." The moment he was gone, Margaret pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the photographs and audio recordings from the previous night. The images of David and Jessica embracing were damning enough, but the recorded conversation about hospital accidents and medication errors made Sarah's blood run cold. He's planning to kill me, Sarah whispered, the reality finally hitting her with full force. My own husband is planning to murder me. Emma grabbed her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. Mom, we have to go to the police. We have to do something. We will, sweetheart, but we need to be smart about this. The recordings were made without David's knowledge, so they might not be admissible in court. And the photographs prove adultery, but not attempted murder. Lucas, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. What if we set a trap? Everyone turned to look at the 14-year-old, surprised by the steel in his voice. I've been thinking about this all night, Lucas continued. Dad doesn't know that we know about Jessica or his plans. What if we use that against him? What do you mean? Sarah asked. What if we make him think his plan is working? Make him believe that you're getting sicker instead of better, so he gets confident and makes a mistake? Margaret's eyes lit up with understanding. If David thinks Sarah's condition is deteriorating, he might get careless. He might reveal more of his plan or even try to accelerate it in a way that we can catch him. Sarah considered this carefully. It's risky. If David realizes we're onto him, he might become dangerous in ways we haven't anticipated. Mom, Emma said firmly, he's already dangerous. At least this way, we're controlling the situation instead of just reacting to it. Dr. Reeves returned an hour later with test results that showed nothing wrong with Sarah's heart function, but Sarah had already prepared for this. Doctor, I need to ask you a huge favor, and I need you to trust me even though I can't explain everything right now. Dr. Reeves looked intrigued. What kind of favor? I need you to tell my husband that my condition has taken a turn for the worse. That the chest pains I described are actually symptoms of a serious complication that could be life-threatening. Mrs. Chen, I can't lie to your family about your medical condition. That would be completely unethical. Margaret stepped forward. Doctor, what if I told you that Sarah's life might depend on you doing this? That her husband might be planning to harm her? Dr. Reeves looked shocked. Are you suggesting that Mr. Chen would hurt his wife? We have evidence that he's been planning for Sarah's death, Margaret said quietly. We believe he may try to cause an accident if he thinks she's going to recover fully. Sarah showed Dr. Reeves the photographs of David and Jessica together. My husband has been having an affair with this woman. They've been planning to start a new life together using my life insurance money. We have recordings of them discussing ways to cause hospital accidents. Dr. Reeves sat down heavily, processing this information. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered. We need to contact hospital security immediately. Not yet, Sarah said urgently. If we alert security now, David will know that we're onto him, and he might disappear or find another way to get to me later. But if we can catch him in the act of trying to harm me, with witnesses and evidence, we can ensure he's stopped permanently. What you're suggesting is incredibly dangerous. Doctor, Lucas spoke up, our dad is planning to kill our mom. We can't just wait around and hope he changes his mind. We need to catch him so that our family will be safe. Dr. Reeves looked at the determined faces around her, a woman fighting for her life, a mother protecting her daughter, and two teenagers trying to save their family. Finally, she nodded. If I do this, we're going to have security positioned nearby at all times. And at the first sign of real danger, we stop the charade and bring in the authorities. Agreed, Sarah said immediately. When David returned with the coffee, he found a very different scene. Dr. Reeves was adjusting Sarah's fur with a concerned expression, while Margaret and the children looked worried and frightened. Mr. Chen, I'm afraid I have some concerning news about your wife's condition, Dr. Reeves announced gravely. David's face immediately shifted into concerned husband mode, but Sarah caught a brief flash of something else, anticipation. What's wrong? Is Sarah okay? The chest pains she's been experiencing are indicative of a serious complication called cardiac tamponade. Fluid is building up around her heart, putting pressure on the organ. If it continues to worsen, it could be fatal within 24 to 48 hours. Sarah watched David's face carefully and saw exactly what she expected. Beneath his mask of concern, there was relief and even excitement. "Is there anything that can be done?" David asked, his voice carrying just the right tone of desperate worry. "We're monitoring her closely and adjusting her medications, but frankly, the next day or two will be critical. We'll know more tomorrow morning." After Dr. Reeves left, David pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway, claiming he needed to call his office about taking more time off work. But through the window, Sarah could see him typing rapidly, and she was certain he was texting Jessica with the good news. That evening, as visiting hours ended, David kissed Sarah's forehead with what seemed like genuine tenderness, but Sarah now recognized it as the calculated gesture of a man saying goodbye to an obstacle he was about to remove. "I love you, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'll be here first thing in the morning." After he left, Margaret settled into the chair beside Sarah's bed. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight." "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. We don't know what David might try, especially now that he thinks you're dying naturally. He might decide to speed things along." As the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, knowing that tomorrow would determine whether her plan to catch David would save her family or destroy them all. The heart monitor beside her bed continued its steady rhythm, but Sarah knew that rhythm represented more than just her heartbeat. It represented her family's future, and she was determined to fight for every beat. Margaret barely slept that night, watching every nurse who entered Sarah's room, scrutinizing every medication that was administered, and noting the times of each check. At 3:17 a.m., her vigilance paid off when she noticed something that made her blood freeze. A night nurse she'd never seen before entered the room carrying a syringe, moving with unusual stealth. Margaret pretended to be asleep while watching through half-closed eyes as the woman approached Sarah's foreline. "Excuse me," Margaret said suddenly, sitting up and startling the nurse. "I don't recognize you. Are you new to this floor?" The woman turned, and Margaret immediately noticed she wasn't wearing a proper hospital ID badge. "I'm covering for someone tonight. Just checking Mrs. Chen's medication levels." "What medication?" Margaret asked, standing up and moving closer. Dr. Reeves didn't mention any nighttime medication changes. The nurse's hand tightened on the syringe. "It's just a routine comfort medication. Nothing to worry about." But Margaret had spent enough time in hospitals caring for her late husband to know that nurses always explained medications clearly, and they never administered anything without checking patient charts and IDs first. "I'd like to see your identification, please," Margaret said firmly, reaching for the call button. The nurse panicked, dropping the syringe and rushing toward the door. Margaret managed to grab her arm, and in the struggle, the woman's wig shifted, revealing short blonde hair underneath. "Security!" Margaret screamed, holding on to the struggling woman. "Help! Security!" Hospital security arrived within minutes, restraining the woman who turned out to be Jessica Martinez. The syringe she dropped contained a lethal dose of potassium chloride, enough to cause immediate cardiac arrest that would appear to be a natural complication from Sarah's surgery. Dr. Reeves arrived shortly after, her face pale with shock. "Mrs. Wong, if you hadn't been here..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah, who had awakened during the commotion, looked at the syringe with horror. "She was going to kill me. David sent his girlfriend to murder me in my hospital bed." The police were called immediately, and Jessica Martinez was arrested for attempted murder. But when they went to arrest David at his home, they found the house empty. He had disappeared, taking his passport, cash from their joint accounts, and several of Sarah's valuable pieces of jewelry. Detective Maria Rodriguez, assigned to the case, arrived at the hospital as dawn was breaking. She listened to Margaret's recording from the apartment balcony and viewed the photographs, building a comprehensive picture of David's conspiracy. "Mrs. Chen, your husband is clearly dangerous and desperate," Detective Rodriguez explained. "We've issued an APB for his arrest, but we believe he may try to contact you or your children. Jessica Martinez is refusing to cooperate, but we have enough evidence to charge both of them with conspiracy to commit murder." Emma and Lucas arrived at the hospital that morning to find their world completely changed. The father they'd trusted and loved had tried to have their mother killed for money, and now he was a fugitive from justice. "Where do you think Dad went?" Lucas asked, his voice hollow with shock and betrayal. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah replied, holding both her children close. "But I promise you that we're going to be safe. We're going to get through this together." What none of them knew was that David hadn't gone far. He was staying at a cheap motel 15 miles from the hospital, consumed with rage that his carefully planned scheme had fallen apart. He'd lost Jessica, who was now in jail because of what he saw as Sarah's manipulations, and he'd lost access to the money that he felt was rightfully his. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, David called Sarah's hospital room from a burner phone, his voice cold and threatening. "Sarah, you think you're so clever, don't you?" Sarah's hand shook as she recognized her husband's voice. Detective Rodriguez, who was in the room, immediately signaled for the call to be traced. "David, where are you? The police want to talk to you." "I bet they do. You destroyed everything, Sarah. Everything we built together, you've destroyed." "I destroyed it?" Sarah's voice rose with anger. "You tried to have me killed. You sent your girlfriend to murder me in my hospital bed. That money should have been mine," David snarled. "I spent 18 years married to you, putting up with your controlling nature, your mother's interference, your obsession with that stupid business. I earned that money." "You earned nothing," Sarah replied firmly. "You betrayed your family, you betrayed your children, and you betrayed every vow you made to me. This isn't over, Sarah. You think you're safe now, but I know where the kids go to school. I know your mother's address. I know your business schedule. You can't hide from me forever." The line went dead, and Detective Rodriguez immediately coordinated with the tech team. "We got a partial trace. He's somewhere in the northern part of the county, but he's using a burner phone and moving locations." Dr. Reeves, who had witnessed the entire conversation, made an immediate decision. "Mrs. Chen, I'm discharging you today, but not to go home. We're arranging for you to stay at a secure location until your husband is apprehended." Sarah's business partner, Maria Santos, arrived that afternoon with news that complicated the situation further. "Sarah, David cleaned out the business accounts yesterday. He had access as your emergency contact, and he withdrew nearly $200,000 before the bank could freeze the accounts." "How is that possible?" "He forged your signature on withdrawal forms, claiming you needed the money for extended medical care. By the time I discovered what happened, he was gone." Emma started crying. "He's stealing from us too? He's not just trying to kill Mom, he's stealing our college money?" Margaret put her arm around her granddaughter. "We'll figure this out, sweetheart. Your mother is a strong, smart woman, and we're not going to let David destroy our family." But the financial theft added a new dimension to David's desperation. He now had cash to stay hidden longer, resources to plan new attacks, and even more motivation to eliminate Sarah permanently since she was the only one who could testify to his forged signatures and financial crimes. That evening, as Sarah was being transferred to a safe house under police protection, she received a text message from an unknown number. "You cost me everything I worked for. Now I'm going to cost you everything you love." The message was accompanied by a photograph that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was a picture of Emma and Lucas leaving their school that afternoon, taken from close range. David had been watching their children. Detective Rodriguez immediately increased security around the kids and Margaret, but the message was clear: David was no longer just trying to claim Sarah's life insurance money. He was now seeking revenge against the entire family, and his desperation made him more dangerous than ever. In his motel room, David stared at his remaining cash and the stolen jewelry, calculating how long he could stay hidden and planning his next move. Jessica's arrest had eliminated his partner, but it had also eliminated the only witness who could directly implicate him in the murder plot. If he could eliminate Sarah and make it look like the random act of a disturbed individual, he might still be able to claim her life insurance as the grieving widower. The children would inherit Sarah's business, but as their father, he would control those assets until they reached adulthood. David realized that his original plan had been too complicated. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective, and he began planning a direct assault that would eliminate Sarah once and for all. The heart monitor that had tracked Sarah's recovery now sat silent in her empty hospital room, but her heart continued beating strong and determined in the safe house, where she spent the night planning not just how to survive David's attacks, but how to ensure her children would never have to fear their father again. The safe house felt like a prison to Sarah, despite the police protection. 3 days had passed since David's threatening call, and the isolation was taking its toll on the entire family. Emma and Lucas were staying with Margaret at her apartment under constant surveillance, unable to attend school or see their friends, while Sarah remained hidden in the sterile government facility. Detective Rodriguez arrived that morning with news that shattered what little security they'd felt. "Mrs. Chen, I'm afraid I have some difficult updates. Jessica Martinez made bail yesterday." Sarah's blood went cold. "How is that possible? She tried to murder me." Her lawyer argued that she was coerced by her husband, painted her as another victim of David's manipulation. The judge set bail at $500,000, and someone posted it anonymously through a bail bonds company. David posted her bail, Sarah realized immediately. He's got the money he stole from our accounts, and now they're working together again. We believe so. And there's more. 2 witnesses reported seeing a man matching David's description near your children's school yesterday. He's becoming bolder, more reckless. Meanwhile, at Margaret's apartment, the stress was manifesting in different ways for each family member. Emma had stopped eating properly and was having nightmares about her father, while Lucas had become withdrawn and angry, spending hours researching self-defense techniques online. "Grandma, what if Dad never gets caught?" Emma asked during breakfast, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we have to live like this forever?" Margaret looked at her granddaughter's pale face and felt her heart breaking. "That's not going to happen, sweetheart. Your father made choices that have consequences, and those consequences are going to catch up with him." But privately, Margaret was beginning to doubt whether the police would be able to protect them effectively. David knew their habits, their routines, their weaknesses better than any law enforcement officer could, and his desperation was making him unpredictable. Lucas suddenly looked up from his laptop, his face excited. "Grandma, I think I've found something important." "What is it, honey?" "I've been going through Dad's email account. He never changed the password, and I remembered it from when he helped me set up my gaming account." Lucas turned the laptop screen toward Margaret. "Look at this email he sent to Jessica 3 weeks ago." Margaret read the email with growing horror. David had detailed not just his plans for Sarah's death, but backup plans if the surgery didn't kill her. He'd researched untraceable poisons, staged accidents, and even hired private investigators to learn Sarah's daily routines. "Lucas, we need to call Detective Rodriguez immediately," Margaret said, reaching for her phone. But as she dialed, the apartment's landline rang. Margaret hesitated, then answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Hello, Margaret. It's your favorite son-in-law." Margaret's hand tightened on the phone while she gestured frantically for Lucas to call the detective on his cell phone. "David, what do you want?" "I want to talk to my children. I want to explain my side of the story before Sarah poisons them against me completely." "Your side?" Margaret's voice was incredulous. "Your side is that you tried to murder their mother for insurance money. What exactly do you think needs explaining? Sarah has been controlling and manipulating this family for years. She turned you against me, she's turning the kids against me, and now she's trying to destroy my life with false accusations." "False accusations?" "David, we have recordings of you planning her death. We have photographs of you with your mistress. Jessica tried to inject Sarah with poison." Emma had come into the living room and was listening to the conversation with tears streaming down her face. To hear her father's voice, still trying to justify his actions, was devastating. I want to see Emma and Lucas, David continued. They're my children, and I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you decided to become a murderer, Margaret replied firmly. If you don't let me see them voluntarily, I'll take them. And if you try to stop me, you'll end up like Sarah was supposed to. The line went dead, and Margaret immediately called Detective Rodriguez while Lucas comforted his sobbing sister. He's lost his mind completely, Margaret told the detective. He's threatening to kidnap the children now. We're moving you to a more secure location immediately, Detective Rodriguez replied. And we're going to use this phone call as evidence to upgrade the charges against him. But David had anticipated this response. He'd been watching Margaret's apartment building for 2 days, noting the police surveillance patterns and identifying the gaps in their coverage. When the police arrived to relocate the family, they found the apartment empty. Margaret, Emma, and Lucas had vanished. At the safe house, Sarah received the devastating news from Detective Rodriguez and felt her world collapse completely. What do you mean they're gone? Where's the protection detail? The officers were drugged. Someone spiked their coffee with a powerful sedative. They were unconscious for over an hour. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of David's escalation. He has my children. He has my mother. This is exactly what he wanted, leverage to force me out of hiding. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah, you have 24 hours to meet me at the location I specify, or you'll never see your family again. Come alone, or they die. Detective Rodriguez immediately began tracing the message while coordinating with FBI agents who were now involved due to the kidnapping charges. Mrs. Chen, we cannot let you meet with your husband. This is clearly a trap designed to eliminate you and your family simultaneously. Then what do you suggest? Sarah asked desperately. That I let him kill my children and my mother to save myself? We're going to find them. We have teams searching every property associated with David or Jessica, every location mentioned in their communications. But Sarah knew David better than the police did. He wouldn't take her family somewhere obvious or traceable. He would choose a location that held significance for their relationship, somewhere that would give him a psychological advantage. Then it hit her. I know where he is. Where? Our first house. The cabin we bought when we were newlyweds, where we spent our anniversaries. David sold it 6 months ago, but the sale hasn't closed yet. He still has access, and it's remote enough that no one would hear screams. Detective Rodriguez immediately dispatched teams to the cabin while Sarah insisted on coming along, despite the obvious danger. This could be exactly what he wants, the detective warned. He could be planning to kill all of you at the location where your marriage began. Maybe, Sarah replied grimly. But he's also planning to kill them anyway if I don't show up. At least this way, we have a chance. As they drove toward the cabin in the mountains, Sarah's mind raced through 18 years of memories with David. She tried to identify the moment when the man she'd loved had transformed into someone capable of murdering his own family, but the transformation had been so gradual, so subtle, that she couldn't pinpoint when love had died and greed had taken its place. The cabin came into view as sunset painted the mountain sky red, and Sarah could see David's BMW parked outside. Through the windows, she could make out figures moving inside. Her family was alive, but for how much longer? Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled with updates from the tactical team surrounding the property, but Sarah barely heard the strategic discussions. All she could think about was that her children were inside that cabin with a man who valued money more than their lives, and that the next few hours would determine whether her family survived or whether David's greed would finally destroy everything she held dear. The heart that had survived surgery was now facing its greatest test, not of physical endurance, but of a mother's determination to save her children from the monster their father had become. The tactical team's plan was precise but dangerous. Sarah would approach the cabin alone while snipers and agents positioned themselves around the perimeter. Detective Rodriguez fitted Sarah with a wire and a GPS tracker, knowing that David's desperation had reached a critical point where negotiation might be impossible. Remember, Mrs. Chen, your job is to keep your family alive until we can create an opening. Don't try to be a hero. We need you to survive this. Sarah nodded, but inside she knew that if it came down to a choice between her life and her children's lives, there was no decision to make. She would do whatever it took to protect Emma, Lucas, and Margaret. As Sarah approached the cabin's front door, memories flooded back of happier times when she and David had been young and in love, planning their future together in the same space. The irony that their marriage might end where it had truly begun wasn't lost on her. She knocked on the door, and David's voice called out, "Sarah, I know you're not alone. Tell your police friends to back off, or this gets very ugly very quickly." "I'm alone, David. I want to see my family." The door opened, and Sarah's heart broke at what she saw. Margaret was tied to a chair with duct tape over her mouth, but her eyes were fierce and alert. Emma and Lucas were bound together on the couch, both crying but trying to be brave. Jessica stood behind them holding a gun, her hands shaking with obvious fear. "Welcome to our reunion, sweetheart," David said with a cold smile. "I thought it was appropriate to have our final conversation in the place where we promised to love each other forever." "Let them go, David. Your fight is with me, not with them. Actually, my fight is with all of you. You turned my children against me, you turned your mother against me, and you turned the police against me. You destroyed my life, so now I'm going to destroy yours." Sarah noticed that David appeared disheveled and manic, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and stress. Jessica looked even worse, clearly in over her head and terrified of the situation she'd helped create. "Jessica," Sarah said quietly, "you don't have to do this. You're young, you could still have a good life. Don't let David drag you down with him." "Shut up!" David screamed. "Jessica loves me, and she understands what we're fighting for. Tell her, Jess." But Jessica's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the gun. "David, maybe we should just take the money and run. We don't have to hurt anyone else." "There is no money!" David roared. Sarah made sure of that when she survived the surgery and changed all the account access. "The only way we get what's ours is if she dies and I inherit everything as the grieving widower." Sarah realized that David's plan had a fatal flaw: he'd kidnapped witnesses. Even if he killed her, Margaret and the children could testify to his guilt. He was so consumed with rage and greed that he wasn't thinking clearly anymore. "David, look at your children. Really look at them. Do you see fear in their eyes? They're terrified of their own father. Is this really who you want to be?" For a moment, David's expression softened as he looked at Emma and Lucas, and Sarah saw a flicker of the man she'd once loved. But then his face hardened again. "They'll understand someday. When they're older and they realize that everything I did was to secure their future." "No, Dad," Emma said through her tears, her voice muffled by the duct tape but still audible. "We'll never understand this." The sound of his daughter's voice seemed to shake David, and Sarah seized the moment. "Emma, Lucas, I want you to know that no matter what happens here, you are the best parts of my life. You are strong, brave, and loved, and you're going to grow up to be amazing people." "Stop it," David said, raising his own gun. "Stop trying to manipulate them with your sentimental garbage." But Sarah continued, looking directly at her children. "And I want you to remember that the man pointing a gun at us isn't really your father. Your real father was the one who taught you to ride bikes and helped with homework and told you bedtime stories. That man is still in there somewhere, buried under all this anger and greed." Margaret managed to work one hand partially free from her bonds and was slowly reaching for a heavy ceramic vase on the side table, hoping to create a distraction. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Detective Rodriguez coordinating the assault team, but she knew they were waiting for a clear shot that wouldn't endanger the hostages. "David," Sarah said gently, "do you remember our first night in this cabin? We talked about the family we wanted to build, the children we'd raise together, the life we'd create. That was real. That love was real. That was before I realized what you really were," David snarled. "Controlling, manipulative, always thinking you were better than me. I never thought I was better than you. I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together. Jessica suddenly spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. David, I can't do this anymore. I can't point a gun at children. You can and you will, David replied without taking his eyes off Sarah. We've come too far to back down now. But Jessica was already lowering the gun, her face pale with realization of what she'd become part of. This isn't what you told me it would be like. You said Sarah was a terrible person, but she's just trying to protect her family. Jessica, don't you dare. Margaret chose that moment to throw the vase, striking David in the shoulder and causing him to spin around in surprise. Sarah immediately lunged forward, trying to reach her children, while Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled through the earpiece, "Go, go, go." The cabin's windows exploded inward as the tactical team entered from multiple directions. In the chaos, Jessica dropped her gun and fell to her knees, sobbing and surrendering immediately. David tried to regain control of his weapon, but Lucas had managed to free himself enough to kick over the coffee table, creating another obstacle. "Nobody move!" David screamed, waving his gun wildly. "I'll kill them all!" But Sarah was already cutting Emma's bonds with a piece of broken vase, and Margaret had freed herself completely. The family that David had tried to destroy was fighting back together, and their combined strength was more than his desperation could overcome. Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with her weapon drawn. "David Chin, drop your weapon now." For a moment, David stood frozen, looking around at the tactical officers, at his terrified former mistress, at his family working together to escape his control. The reality of his situation finally seemed to penetrate his manic state. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I had it all planned out perfectly." "Dad," Lucas said, now standing protectively in front of his sister, "it's over. Just put the gun down." David looked at his son, really looked at him, and Sarah saw the exact moment when the last remnants of the man she'd married finally died, replaced completely by a stranger consumed with greed and rage. "If I can't have the life I planned," David said, raising the gun towards Sarah, "then no one gets to have anything." The gunshot that followed echoed through the mountain air, but it wasn't David's gun that fired. Detective Rodriguez's bullet found its target, and David Chin collapsed to the cabin floor, his schemes and manipulations finally ended. In the silence that followed, Sarah gathered her children and mother into her arms, all of them crying but alive, their nightmare finally over. The man who had promised to love and protect them had become their greatest threat, but their love for each other had proven stronger than his greed. The heart that had survived surgery, survived attempted poisoning, and survived a kidnapping continued beating strong and steady, ready to heal and ready to build a new life free from the shadow of David's betrayal. The weeks following David's death at the cabin were a blur of police investigations, media attention, and the beginning of an emotional healing process that would take years to complete. Sarah found herself facing not just the grief of losing the man she'd once loved, but the complex trauma of having been hunted by him. Jessica Martinez pleaded guilty to attempted murder and conspiracy charges, receiving a reduced sentence in exchange for her full cooperation with authorities. During her testimony, she revealed the extent of David's manipulation and planning, painting a picture of a man who had methodically planned his wife's death while maintaining the facade of a loving husband. "He told me Sarah was emotionally abusive," Jessica testified through tears. "He said she controlled every aspect of his life and that she was planning to leave him and take everything. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." Sarah sat in the courtroom listening to Jessica's testimony, trying to reconcile the man being described with the David she'd married 18 years earlier. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but the signs had been there: the gradual financial questions, the increasing resentment when Sarah's business succeeded, the subtle undermining of her confidence. Dr. Patricia Reeves, who had become more than just Sarah's surgeon, visited the family regularly during the recovery period. She'd been deeply affected by her role in uncovering David's plot and had developed a personal investment in Sarah's healing. "Physical recovery is often easier than emotional recovery," Dr. Reeves explained during one of her visits. "Your heart is healing beautifully from the surgery, but the trauma of betrayal leaves different scars." Emma had been struggling the most with the aftermath. At 16, she was old enough to understand the full implications of what her father had done, but young enough to still need the security of believing her family was safe. She'd been having nightmares and had difficulty trusting anyone outside their immediate circle. "Mom, what if there are other people like Dad out there?" Emma asked one evening as they sat together in their temporary apartment. "What if we can never really trust anyone again?" Sarah held her daughter close, struggling with the same questions herself. "Sweetheart, what your father did was not yours." Lucas nodded, his voice thick with emotion. He saw Mom's success as something to steal, Emma's intelligence as something to control, Grandma's wisdom as something to dismiss, and my potential as something to own. He never understood that we were stronger together than he could ever be alone. Maria Santos arrived with her husband and 2 children, carrying a homemade cake and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose best friend had not only survived hell but had emerged stronger than ever. Sarah's business partnership with Maria had evolved into a thriving enterprise that employed 12 people and had been featured in magazines for both its design excellence and its commitment to hiring domestic violence survivors. "Sarah, the Morrison family wants to commission us to design their new domestic violence shelter," Maria announced. "They specifically requested us because they said they want a space designed by someone who understands both beauty and survival." The conversation around the dining table was rich with laughter, tears, and memories as the extended family, biological and chosen, shared stories of growth, challenges overcome, and dreams for the future. Dr. Morrison, the family therapist who had guided their healing journey, often marveled at how this group had transformed trauma into purpose, pain into compassion, and fear into fearless love. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself studying the faces around her table. Emma's eyes sparkled with intelligence and compassion that would serve her well in her chosen profession. Lucas's jaw showed the same determined set that had always characterized Sarah's own approach to challenges, but tempered with a wisdom far beyond his years. Margaret's face bore the lines of someone who had lived fully and loved deeply, her strength having anchored the family through their darkest hours. "I want to say something," Sarah announced, standing and raising her glass of sparkling cider. 2 years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, convinced that my life was ending. David had planned my death, stolen our money, and destroyed the trust that held our family together. I thought we'd lost everything that mattered." She paused, looking around the table at the faces of people who had chosen to love her not despite her trauma, but including it as part of who she'd become. "But what I've learned is that David never had the power to destroy the things that actually mattered. He couldn't steal our love for each other. He couldn't manipulate away our courage. He couldn't buy or sell our integrity. The most valuable things we possessed were never his to take." Emma stood next, raising her own glass. "To Mom, who taught us that surviving isn't enough, we have to choose to thrive." Lucas joined them. "To Grandma, who proved that protecting your family sometimes means being brave enough to face danger head-on." Margaret rose slowly, her eyes bright with tears of pride. "To my daughter, who showed us all that a heart can be broken and still beat strong." "To my grandchildren, who learned that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling you have." And to David. The table fell silent, surprised by Margaret's mention of the man who had caused them so much pain. "To David," Margaret continued, "who taught us that we are capable of surviving anything, forgiving everything, and building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. He tried to make us smaller, but he actually made us larger than we ever imagined we could be." Dr. Reeves raised her glass as well. "To a family that redefined what it means to heal, not just from physical wounds, but from the deepest kind of emotional trauma. You've shown thousands of other families that it's possible to emerge from darkness stronger than before." As they toasted, Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the strong, steady beating of her heart. The same heart that had survived surgery, poison, and the ultimate betrayal. But now it beat with a different rhythm, one that had learned to pump not just blood, but hope, courage, and infinite love through her body. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were washed, Sarah walked through her house, appreciating every detail she'd carefully designed. The family photos told the story of their journey, pictures from before David's betrayal showed smiles that were real but somehow less complete than the ones taken after. The trauma had stripped away pretenses and revealed the unshakable core of who they really were. In her bedroom, Sarah opened the drawer where she kept a letter she'd written but never sent, a final message to David that she'd composed during therapy. She read it one last time before finally feeling ready to let it go. David, I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because our children deserve to see that love is stronger than hate, that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds, and that some things, the most important things, can never be stolen or destroyed. You tried to end my story, but instead, you helped me write the most important chapters. Our children will grow up knowing that real love means protecting each other, supporting each other's dreams, and choosing each other every day. That's the legacy you could have left, but chose not to. It's the legacy I'm choosing instead. Sarah tore up the letter and scattered the pieces in her garden, letting them decompose and nourish the soil where new growth would emerge. As she prepared for bed, Emma knocked softly on her door. Mom, can I tell you something? Always, sweetheart. I used to be afraid that I'd never be able to trust anyone enough to fall in love and get married. I thought Dad had ruined that for me forever. Sarah's heart ached, remembering her own fears about whether David's betrayal had broken something essential in all of them. But watching you build this new life, seeing how you've chosen to love people despite what he did, it's shown me that the capacity to love isn't something that can be damaged by someone else's choices. It's something that grows stronger when we're brave enough to keep using it. They hugged for a long time, mother and daughter, survivors and thrivers, two hearts beating in rhythm with the unbreakable bond that had sustained them through their darkest hours. That night, Sarah lay in her bed listening to the peaceful sounds of her home, the gentle ticking of clocks, the soft breathing of her family sleeping safely nearby, the whisper of wind through the trees she'd planted to create privacy and beauty around their new life. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, each pulse a testament to survival, resilience, and the transformative power of love. David had planned for that heart to stop beating 2 years ago, but instead, it had learned to beat stronger, steadier, and with more purpose than ever before. In the morning, there would be new challenges, new opportunities to help other families, new ways to grow and heal and thrive. But tonight, Sarachan fell asleep surrounded by love, protected by truth, and sustained by the certain knowledge that some things, the most precious things, could never be bought, sold, stolen, or destroyed. Her heart continued its steady rhythm through the night, pumping life and hope and infinite possibility through every cell of her body, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that she and her family had survived the worst and emerged with something even more valuable than what they'd started with, the unshakable certainty that their love for each other could overcome anything. The girl who had married Davidson 18 years ago was gone, but the woman who had emerged from that marriage's ashes was stronger, braver, and more authentically herself than she'd ever been. And her heart, which had survived everything David could throw at it, would continue beating strong and true for many years to come, nurturing not just her own dreams, but the dreams of everyone whose life she touched with her story of survival, forgiveness, and the infinite resilience of the human spirit.